Have you ever been in a room where you can feel something's wrong, but no one will tell you what it is? Where every glance feels like it's hiding a secret, and every silence is heavier than the words you're not hearing? That was me. The night 10 men could do whatever they wanted, and my husband just sat there, watching. I know how it sounds, like something out of a movie, but I promise you, this is a true story. One moment, I thought we were just having a quiet evening. The next, our home wasn't ours anymore. 10 strangers, or so I thought, were in control of the room, the mood, and somehow, me. My husband didn't speak, didn't stop them, didn't even move. Was it fear? Was it betrayal? Or was it something else entirely? Over the next few minutes, I'm going to take you inside that night. Every look, every unspoken word, and every moment that changed what I thought I knew about my marriage, my past, and even myself. And by the time you hear the truth, you'll understand why nothing about my life has been the same since. I remember that night like it was yesterday. The air was heavy, as if the walls themselves could feel the tension brewing inside our little living room. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I didn't say a word. I couldn't. Across the room, my husband sat frozen, his eyes locked on the scene unfolding right in front of him. 10 men, yes, 10, moved around as if they owned the place, doing whatever they pleased. And the most shocking part, my husband just watched. He didn't speak. He didn't stop them. He didn't even move. At first I thought it was some kind of twisted joke, but the look on his face told me this was no joke. It was real, and whatever was happening here had a history, a story that stretched far beyond that single night. I could feel my skin prickle as I realized I had stepped into a world I didn't understand, one where loyalty, love, and trust were suddenly in question. I had to wonder, who were these men? Why did they feel so comfortable taking over our space, our life, as if boundaries didn't exist? And why was my husband, the man I thought I knew better than anyone, doing absolutely nothing to stop them? Every smile they exchanged with each other felt like a secret I wasn't part of. Every glance they threw my way carried an unspoken message I couldn't yet decode. In that moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier, and my thoughts louder. 1,000 questions raced through my mind, but one overpowered them all. Was this the first time something like this had happened? Or had I been blind to it all along? You might think you know how you'd react in a moment like this, but trust me, until you felt the ground shift beneath your feet, you can't truly know. I could almost hear the ticking of the clock, each second stretching into an eternity. 10 men, my husband, me, and a truth I was about to uncover that would change everything. What happened next was something I could never have prepared for. Each step, each word, each choice made in that room would set off a chain of events I still struggle to believe. I can tell you this much. It wasn't about fear alone. It was about control, about secrets, and about a test of love I never saw coming. And just when I thought I understood what was happening, one of those men stepped closer, leaned in, and said something to me that made my blood run cold. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried enough weight to make my stomach twist. I didn't respond right away. My eyes darted to my husband, hoping for some sign, some reaction, anything that would tell me what was going on. But he stayed still, his hands clasped together, his jaw tight. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, like the answers might be hiding in the wood grain beneath his feet. I wanted to believe there was a good reason for all of this. Maybe they were old friends. Maybe there was a business deal I didn't know about. But nothing about the way they moved, the way they carried themselves, felt friendly or professional. It was like they had been here before, like they knew exactly where everything was and exactly what they could get away with. I thought back to the weeks before this night. My husband had been distant, always distracted, his phone buzzing late into the night. I'd asked him about it once, and he'd brushed it off with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Work stuff, he said. I didn't press him then, but now those moments replayed in my head with a new, unsettling clarity. The man who had spoken to me took a step back, his expression unreadable. The others were talking among themselves, their voices low, their laughter sharp. It wasn't the kind of laughter that comes from joy. It was the kind that makes you feel like the punchline of a joke you don't understand. Every sound seemed to echo in my chest, amplifying the unease that was quickly turning into dread. I wanted to stand up, to demand answers, but something in my husband's stillness stopped me. He wasn't afraid in the way you'd expect. It was almost like he'd accepted whatever this was, like he'd made some kind of decision long before tonight. And if that was true, then what did that mean for me? Outside, the wind rattled the windows, and for a moment, it was the only sound in the room. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. These men weren't here by accident. They weren't here for small talk or a casual visit. No, this was planned, organized, and my husband was a part of it. The realization hit me so hard I almost forgot to breathe. And yet, even as fear tightened its grip, another thought crept in. A dangerous, tempting thought. If they had a plan, maybe I could figure it out before it was too late. But first I had to keep calm. I had to pretend I wasn't already piecing together the truth. Because if they knew I was starting to understand, I didn't know what they would do next. One of the men moved toward the kitchen, opening cupboards without asking, pulling out glasses like he owned them. Another leaned against the wall near me, his eyes scanning the room with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing no one will challenge you. The others spread out, talking quietly, their words just out of earshot. It was like watching pieces on a chessboard shift into position, each move deliberate. My husband finally looked up, but instead of meeting my eyes, he glanced toward the man nearest me. There was something in that exchange, unspoken, sharp, that made me feel like I was standing in the middle of a conversation I couldn't hear, but was entirely about me. It wasn't just about them being here. It was about something bigger, something they all knew, and I didn't. I tried to remember if I'd seen any of these men before. Faces blurred together in my mind, maybe from the few parties my husband had taken me to, or from those rare dinners where he insisted we sit in the corner, away from everyone else. He always said it was to keep things private, but now I wondered if it was to keep me away from certain people. Every detail felt like a clue. The way they glanced at their watches, the way my husband's phone buzzed and he ignored it, the way the air in the room felt charged, like something was about to happen, but no one was willing to be the first to break the silence. A man near the doorway caught my gaze for just a second. His eyes didn't look curious, they looked calculating, and in that moment, I knew the truth was here, in this room, hidden behind whatever game they were all playing, but I still didn't know the rules. The man in the doorway didn't look away this time. He stepped forward slowly, and the room seemed to grow smaller with every step he took. The conversations around us faded, replaced by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the pounding in my chest. My husband's eyes followed him, and I caught the briefest flicker of something, fear, maybe, or regret, before he looked away again. The man stopped just a few feet from me. "You've been asking questions," he said, his voice calm but edged with something that made the hairs on my neck rise. My mind raced. Who had told him that? I hadn't said anything, not out loud at least. Behind him, two others shifted closer to my husband. He didn't resist, didn't even move, but his shoulders tightened. I couldn't tell if he was protecting me or protecting himself. Every glance, every movement in the room was loaded, like a wire stretched too tight. One wrong word, and it would all snap. My instincts screamed at me to get out, to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The man's gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, it felt like he could see straight through me. "You're smarter than you look," he said quietly, and the way the others glanced toward him made my pulse spike. Something was about to happen. I could feel it. The tension wasn't just in the air, it was in the way they stood, in the way they watched each other, in the way my husband finally lifted his head to look directly at me. His lips parted like he was about to speak, to finally explain everything. But before he could say a word, the front door slammed. The slam of the front door was so loud, it felt like it shook the walls. Everyone in the room froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. A moment later, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, slow but deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They wanted us to know they were coming. The man in front of me didn't move, but I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. The others straightened, shifting their weight like they were preparing for something. My husband's hands unclasped for the first time all night, his knuckles pale. Then, a voice called out from the hallway, deep and calm, but carrying the kind of authority that demanded attention. "I told you not to start without me." The words were casual, almost conversational, but the effect was immediate. The man in front of me stepped back, the two near my husband moved aside, and for the first time, I realized they weren't in control. Not completely. A tall figure appeared in the doorway, dressed in dark clothes that seemed to swallow the light. His gaze swept the room, landing on me last. He smiled, not a warm smile, but the kind that hides something dangerous underneath. "So," he said softly, "you're the one I've been hearing about." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. I could sense that this man's arrival had changed everything. Whatever tension had been building between my husband and the 10 men was now tangled with something even bigger. My husband's eyes darted between us, his jaw tightening. He opened his mouth like he wanted to speak, but the newcomer raised a hand, and he fell silent. I didn't know whether this man was here to help me or to make things worse, but I could feel the shift in the air. Everyone was on edge now, including him. He stepped into the room fully, closing the door behind him without breaking eye contact with me. "You've been left in the dark long enough," he said, his tone almost sympathetic. "But the truth, it's not what you think." I could feel every eye in the room watching me, waiting for my reaction. My pulse raced, and my thoughts scrambled for meaning. If what he was about to say wasn't what I thought, then what was it? And why did my husband look like he'd rather be anywhere else than here? Before I could speak, the newcomer took another step closer, and that's when I saw what he was holding. It wasn't a weapon, it was a small, battered envelope, the edges frayed like it had been carried around for years. The man held it between two fingers as though it was more dangerous than anything metal or sharp. His eyes stayed locked on mine as he crossed the last few steps and placed it on the table between us. "Go ahead," he said quietly. "Open it." I hesitated, glancing at my husband. His face was pale now, his lips pressed in a thin line. The 10 men had gone silent, their earlier bravado gone, replaced by something I couldn't name. Anticipation, maybe, or fear. My hands shook as I reached for the envelope, feeling the weight of every gaze in the room. Inside were photographs, old ones. My husband in places I'd never seen before, with people I didn't recognize, except for the fact that every single one of the 10 men in this room was in at least one picture. Some were laughing, others looking over their shoulders like they were being followed, and then there was the last photo. Me. Taken from a distance. Not recent, but not that old either. I looked up, my voice barely a whisper. "Why do you have these?" The man in black didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to my husband. "Tell her." My husband's voice cracked. "It wasn't supposed to get this far. I was keeping you safe." His words tumbled out, but they didn't make sense. Not yet. They wanted leverage. You were the leverage. It hit me like a cold wave. This whole night, the silence, the stares, it had been about me. But before I could process it, the man in black leaned closer and said, "He's not telling you the whole truth." The room seemed to tilt. My husband looked at him sharply, but the man just smiled faintly. "You were never the leverage," he said, his tone almost gentle. "You're the reason they came back at all." The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. Every eye was still on me, but it wasn't suspicion anymore. It was something closer to recognition, as if they all knew something about me that I didn't know myself. And that's when I realized, maybe I wasn't the victim in this story after all. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. I stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on me, my mind scrambling for answers that didn't seem to exist. "What do you mean?" I finally asked, my voice unsteady. The man in black glanced at the photographs still spread across the table. "You've been part of this from the beginning," he said. "Long before you met your husband, long before you even knew these men existed." It sounded impossible, My memories didn't match his story, but as he spoke, fragments of the past I had buried or ignored began to surface. Faces I couldn't place, strange encounters I'd dismissed, moments that never quite made sense. My husband's eyes softened, but there was no denying it now. He had been protecting me, yes, but also hiding me from truths I wasn't ready to face. The 10 men shifted uneasily, as though this revelation unsettled even them. The man in black continued, his tone calmer now. You were the connection, the reason this group ever formed. You may not remember, but they do. And they came here tonight not to harm you, but to decide if they could trust you again. The tension in the room began to change, though it didn't disappear entirely. I looked at my husband, and for the first time that night he met my gaze without looking away. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if you remembered, it would pull you back into something I couldn't save you from. I didn't know whether to feel betrayed or grateful. But one thing was clear, the people in this room weren't strangers. They were part of a story I had unknowingly lived. And now, I had a choice. To walk away and never look back, or to step into the truth, whatever it was. I took a deep breath, pushing the photographs toward the center of the table. If you're all going to keep telling my story, I said quietly, then I want to hear it from the beginning. The man in black smiled faintly, and the others exchanged glances. My husband reached for my hand under the table, and just like that, the night that began with 10 men in my living room ended with the understanding that my life was about to change forever, again.